Hello, welcome to the Wealth starting line. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Picture this. It's November 25th, 2025. US regulators make this super quiet announcement about a new rule. And the name of this rule is so boring it is practically designed to make your eyes glaze over. But what they'd actually just done? They pulled a trigger on one of the biggest financial events of our time.
Because this one tiny little change to a single rule unleashed $5 trillion in financial capacity. And to be clear, we're not talking about your average stimulus check here. This was basically a stealth QE, a secret flood of cash bigger than the entire economy of Japan. It was a financial big bang hidden in plain sight.
So, you might be asking, why do this? Well, the official story you'll hear is full of jargon. Optimizing capital, improving efficiency. But the real story? Oh, it's way juicier. It's a high-stakes drama about a mountain of debt, a desperate government, and a choice between breaking the rules or, well, breaking the entire system. This was never about saving the banks, it was about saving the US Treasury.
To really get why this is such a massive deal, we've got to go back in time. We need to revisit the absolute nightmare that was the 2008 financial crisis.
So, after the world pretty much imploded in '08, regulators created this thing called the Supplementary Leverage Ratio, or SLR. The best way to think of it is like a pair of golden handcuffs they slapped on the biggest banks. The whole point was simple, to stop them from making massive bets, no matter how safe they claimed those bets were.
And here was the key difference, right? Before 2008, the rules were super complex. Banks would say, oh, these US Treasury bonds are risk-free, and then they'd leverage up to the moon. They completely gamed the system. The new SLR rule was the total opposite. It was simple. It was blunt. It was like, I don't care how safe you think your stuff is. For every $100 you're playing with, 5 of it has to be your own money. Period.
And you know what? For about a decade, it actually worked. Things were kind of stable. But then, March 2020 happened, and all of a sudden, those golden handcuffs, they weren't a safety measure anymore. They were the problem.
When the pandemic kicked off, the Treasury market, the bedrock of the entire global financial system, it just seized up, frozen solid. The Fed was begging the big banks, please step in, buy this stuff, stabilize the market. But the banks were like, we can't. If we buy more bonds, we'll break the SLR rule. The very rule meant to keep them safe was stopping them from saving the day. So regulators panicked and took the handcuffs off for a year. But then, in 2021, they put them right back on.
Okay, so that leads to the trillion-dollar question. If they put the handcuffs back on in 2021, why on earth did they just permanently change the lock in 2025? Well, the answer? It's the elephant in the room that everyone in Washington, D.C. pretends not to see.
And here it is. The U.S. national debt is just exploding. We're rocketing towards $40 trillion. And get this, it's growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Just let that sink in. It's not just some abstract number on a spreadsheet. It's becoming a fiscal black hole, and it's starting to warp everything around it.
And that brings us to this really scary concept called fiscal dominance. So what does that mean? It means the government's desperate need to borrow money becomes the only thing that matters. Forget financial stability. Forget fighting inflation. Every single decision, from the Fed, from regulators, gets twisted to serve one single goal, making sure the government can keep racking up debt.
And you see, the Treasury was getting really desperate. Their usual customers for all this debt, countries like China and Japan, they're backing away. The Fed can't just fire up the money printer and buy it all, not without causing massive inflation. So who's left? Yup, the big US banks. But remember those handcuffs? They couldn't buy nearly enough. The government was basically trying to force-feed the system more debt than it could possibly swallow. So what do you do when you're in that position? Well, you perform a little microsurgery on the rules. Let's break down how this one tiny tweak doesn't just solve the government's problem, it completely changes the game for all of Wall Street.
Now, if you look at the rule change, it seems super technical, something about a GSIB score. All that really means is they're tailoring the rule for each big bank. But the effect? It's anything but boring. For pretty much every single major bank, it means their capital requirement goes down. The handcuffs aren't just unlocked, they're permanently loosened. And boom, there's your $5 trillion of new capacity.
And all this new capacity creates this brand new money pipeline. But this money isn't going to Main Street for mortgages. Oh no. It's flowing straight into the plumbing of Wall Street, the repo market. This lets the big banks lend insane amounts of cash to hedge funds. And what do the hedge funds do with all that cheap money? You guessed it. They turn around and buy U.S. government debt. So, okay, let's follow the money. Who wins here? Well, number one with a bullet is the US Treasury. They just manufactured a captive buyer for their endless debt. Hedge funds? They're laughing all the way to the bank, with access to nearly unlimited cheap leverage. But there's a surprise winner, too. All this new cash is a stealth QE, right? And when you create more currency, what as well? Stuff you can't print. Think gold. Think Bitcoin. The odd one out is actually the banks themselves. They get bigger, sure, but they're being pushed into a low-profit business that hurts their actual profitability. Weird, right? Good. And this is a huge but. This clever, elegant solution, this masterpiece of financial engineering, it comes with a price tag. A really, really terrifying one. Here's the thing about debt crises. You never really solve them. You just move them around. And that's exactly what happened here. They solved the government's debt problem by creating a massive private sector leverage problem. The risk didn't just vanish, it was just handed off from the public's balance sheet to Wall Street's.
And that is the new powder keg. Think about it. The stability of the entire US government now depends on a bunch of hedge funds making a super leveraged bet. I'm talking 50, even 100-to-1 leverage. That is absolutely insane. It means if interest rates tick up just a tiny bit, these funds could get vaporized instantly. And that would trigger a fire sale in the bond market that would make 2020 look like a picnic. You're not putting out the fire, you're just pouring gasoline on it.
So the game has completely changed. To avoid one crisis today, a government debt crisis, we've basically guaranteed a much bigger one tomorrow. We've built a financial system that is bigger, more interconnected, and way more fragile than it has ever been. And that leaves us with one final, very unsettling question. What's the real cost of this $5 trillion loophole?
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time.